Okay everyone, so now I have finished adding the damage to our DAW, and I have also given names to those two normal map groups. So now let's have a look at what I did. Okay, so basically I have added some damage here and there to all elements of our DAW. I've also added some vertical scratches to make it look like the sides of the elements are slightly crooked. Now let's preview the result. And as you can see, adding some even very subtle damage is a very good way to increase the realism of hard surface materials. Now, as I mentioned before, we'll be adding some more damage later on, but for now, this will have to do. Now, before we start working on our diffuse, there's one more tweak I like to apply to my normal maps. So, I'll close the previewer, and I'll go and select this normal group. Now I'll go and select duplicate group, okay. And now I'll merge this whole group. Okay. Now I'll go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I'll go with something like 5 pixels for the radius. Okay. Now let's go and let's change the blending mode of this layer to Overlay. And now let's drop down the opacity down to maybe 30. Okay, now as you can see, we can still see the sharpness of the layer underneath this overlay layer. So let's preview it, and now we won't be able to see the results, so we have to right click and click on this chain icon to actually bind this whole PSD file with nDo. Okay, so now let's zoom in and let's see what our normal map looks like. So as you can see, the light seems to affect the surface slightly differently, and this will basically prevent your texture from looking too flat. Now I think the effect is a bit too strong, so I'm gonna reduce the opacity a little bit more. That seems to look better. So with this trick you can basically make the surface look slightly bent. So let's close this. And now, before we move on, let's use this normal map to generate some additional maps that we'll use during texturing. So I'll go and click this Convert button here, and now from this menu I'll go and choose the AO map. I'll click the active dock, and now nDo will try to create an AO map for us automatically. So for those who are not familiar with AO maps, it stands for ambient occlusion, and it's basically used to darken up the areas where the light is not supposed to reach, like corners, indents, some cracks, and so on. Okay, now before we save this AO map, let's make some changes. So I'll go and select this Fine Shadow group here, and now I'll change the curve to half round. Now as you can see, our AO map becomes a lot softer. So maybe let's increase the size a bit. Okay, and let's go back by clicking this button. Okay, now let's adjust the medium shadow. So again, let's change the curve to half round. And let's play around with the softness setting. Maybe let's try something lower. Okay, that should do it. Now let's go back again. And let's also change the large shadow. Here I'm going to increase the size. Use the half round. And I'll increase the softness to a very large value. Then I'm gonna tweak the opacity down, and I think that's gonna do it. Now the reason why we did all of this is because we want to have two kinds of AO maps. We want to have one that will have very soft shadows, and another one which will have very sharp and defined shadowed areas. Right, so now let's go and save this one. I'll call it Industrial DAW AO Broad. Okay. And now let's close this file, and let's go and let's make a cavity map. So again, click Convert, Cavity, and we're going to use this map to add some highlights along the edges. So let's click Active Dock, and that's all we have to do. We can't readjust any settings, but we'll modify this map later. So now let's save it. I'll call it Industrial DAW Cavity. Okay. And now let's close this, and let's create one final map. So we're gonna create this sharp AO map. So I'll click Diffuse, Active Dock, and this process can take quite a long time. On my PC it takes up to 40 seconds, so I'm actually showing you a sped up version of the video. Okay, so now that this process is finished, you can see that this map actually looks very, very nice. But before we save it, let's tweak a few settings. So I'm gonna go and adjust the AO depth setting to the max to make the shadows more intense. And I'll go and lower the cavity to 40 because we already have a separate cavity map. Okay, Now let's go and save it, and I'll call it industrial.ao shop. Right. Okay, so that's pretty much all the maps we need. So in the next chapter, we're going to combine all of them, and we'll start working on our diffuse.